encouraging my colleagues who are not in the committee. Mr. Koretz, gold star for you today. Anybody else who is listening, we would really appreciate if my colleagues would make their way to committee. Colleagues, or I should say Mr. Koretz, what I'd like to do is go ahead and take the speaker cards first so we can go ahead and hopefully inform the conversation for the panelists that will follow all of this, and we'll go ahead and move that out of the way. Would like to ask anybody if they're interested in filling out a speaker card for item 1 and 2. We're going to take them concurrently to fill out a card if you haven't, because we will close the receipt of these cards in a few seconds. Anybody else? Item 1 and 2? Come on up. There you go. Anybody else? Okay, great. We'll take that card. And we'll go ahead and close the cards here because we've got plenty of them. With that, I'd like to invite up Nora Lohman. Again, we're speaking on items 1 and 2. Nora Lohman, Brenna Norton, Bruce Campbell, and Steve Fox. Come on up, please.
How much time?
1 minute.
Should I begin?
Yes, please.
Okay. My name is Nora Lohman. I'm here today after a bout of food poisoning at about 10 a.m. today, as this tunnel project cannot go through as currently configured. That's a no on item 1. As for item 2, we must have an independent study and cost analysis. Therefore, I support the Koretz-Bonin motion. The City of LA must do its duty and protect ratepayers and not rush through comment at this time. Please do not raise working people's water rates for the benefit of corporate profits. Thank you.
Hi there, Brenna Norton with the nonprofit Food and Water Watch. Briefly here, really concerned that the Ratepayer Advocate report doesn't do a full cost-benefit analysis. Recently, I heard that the Ratepayer Advocate was confused on the $67 billion cost. If he wants to, he can Google that and come up with a San Mercury news story. The Westlands Water District put together that price estimate based on interest on the financing. We must take interest into account, and it's alarming that the current estimate does not take financing into account on the loan. And we need to protect ratepayers and look at the full cost of this, and I hope you will, and do a full cost-benefit analysis here. Thank you.
My name is Steve Fox. I'm here on behalf of the Temple Isaiah Green Team. In my former life, I was an engineer with the used aircraft company, and I was used to doing very careful analyses because of the consequences of our actions. And I think the consequences of the actions here can be very severe in terms of the impact on the ratepayers. So I see no problem and a great advantage in taking time and making sure that there is an independent analysis, peer-reviewed analysis to make sure that we've got the facts straight, the cost straight, the alternative straight, and the impact on the ratepayer straight. Thank you.
Very good. If we can invite Linda Escalante, Kent Minalt, Mike Chamness, and Dr. Tom Williams. Up, please.
Good day. My name is Bruce Campbell. I strongly oppose LA City's formal support for the environmentally damaging and economically reckless Bdcp. It is especially financially reckless for the LA area, and obviously they should have included financing and likely cost overruns in the economics presented to you. The last water bond, statewide water bond proposed had $900 million for cleanup of San Fernando Valley groundwater. LA City's efforts should be devoted to paring down the water bond to maybe around $5 billion, where voters could handle that cost and keep a good chunk, at least $750 million, for cleanup of San Fernando Valley groundwater. And also I've seen that Mr. Fuentes is leading this committee and has that motion, I believe. I thought of a slogan: "Stop FFTT, stop Felipe Fuentes' tunnels tax."
Thank you very much.
Please don't have that your legacy. Thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Linda Escalante, Policy Advocate for the Natural Resources Defense Council, NRDC. A key element of any successful plan for the Delta is to reduce reliance on water supply from the place and invest in conservation in local and regional water supplies, consistent with state policy enacted in 2009 by the Delta Reform Act. The best available science is clear that reducing water exports from the Delta is needed to protect and restore the Delta. Yet by investing in local and regional supplies, we can reduce imported water and still increase overall water supplies, particularly in dry years. Los Angeles has demonstrated that we can use less water to grow in the economy. We've added nearly 1 million people over the past several decades while using the same amount of water. Other parts of the state need to follow our lead. The mayor has publicly called for Los Angeles to cut its imported water supplies by half by 2024 by investing in water conservation, stormwater capture, and water recycling. Unfortunately, the draft Bay Delta Conservation Plan fails to use sound science and fails to protect fish and wildlife and the health of the Delta. We believe that Los Angeles should lead efforts to support a plan for the Bay Delta that reduces water exports from the Delta and invests in local and regional water.
Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Kent Minot. I'm a volunteer coordinator with the Sierra Club's LA Beyond Coal campaign. There's really two basic considerations that ought to clinch the question before this committee today. One is the fact that every major environmental group that looks out for the health of the salt fresh mixture in the Bay Delta opposes this plan, and there are serious questions about the price tag that we all are going to have to pay for the billions of dollars of this tunnel tax. There's no downside to studying the issue thoroughly before making the decision, so go for the Koretz-Bonin motion and do the study.
Dr. Tom Williams, Sierra Club Angeles Chapter Water Committee and Citizens Coalition for a Safe Community. Basically, you're getting a pig in a poke. Number one, the tunnels won't work without a Sierra Sacramento Valley dam system that was proposed by Schwarzenegger a while ago. Another $20 billion. So the price tag. Reliability. When you consider reliability from seismic events, a tunnel with shafts every 5 miles for 30 miles each, put in a seismically active area where you're concerned about the levees surviving, those won't work in a similar seismic event. They will break and we'll be left with the dams and the levees being flooded and also the tunnels not working. So look at local sources.
Great. Thank you very much.
Mike Chamis, registered voter from Venice, California, obviously. Support the Koretz-Bonin motion. I'm glad you went first because I just learned a lot that I didn't know about the safety of this project. And the $67 billion is the reason I'm here today. I'm taking a 30-minute lunch to walk about 25 minutes. And I'm not going to eat today because it's more important that you understand that you don't need to be the council that does this without a study. An independent study is not that too far of a reach. And I think we're going to hold you accountable if you don't do it. But $67 billion is why I'm here right now. That's outrageous. And I don't think you guys should be the council that passes this without an independent study. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. As those speakers are walking off, colleagues, I notice that we do have a quorum. I would like to, if it's okay without objection, items 4, 5, and 6, put on a consent calendar and move those unanimously unless there's an objection. Hearing and seeing none, that will be the order. And colleagues, thank you for joining. As we invite more public comment up, I wanted to share with you, and hopefully this will inform the conversation from the speakers' public cards. But today we're discussing the Department of Water and Power's report and proposed comment letter on the Bay Delta Conservation Plan and the associated environmental impact report and implementing agreement. There will be an opportunity for the City of Los Angeles to lodge its support or non-support for Bdcp in total, but at this point we are participating in the process and lodging our comments for their record, and then we'll have an opportunity to decide. So hopefully that will benefit the folks who have filled out speaker cards. And just to give you all an order, colleagues, of how we're doing this, we're also taking items 1 and 2 jointly. We've started with public comment. Hopefully that will inform the presentations by staff. And then we will hear from representatives from the California Department of Water Resources and the Metropolitan Water District, who will provide context for the additional discussion today. Following that presentation, we will hear from the Department of Water and Power, the Bureau of Sanitation, and of course our ratepayer advocate. This is an opportunity then for us, colleagues, to discuss the comments that are being lodged in the process of BDCP, and then we will figure out at some point, probably months to come, what Los Angeles will do. So with that, I'd like to invite up Felicia Bander, Daryl Gale, Amy Turnbull, and Alexandra Nagy. And again, we have closed the receipt of cards on these items. The last couple that have made it in, we'll put in, but after that, we will be done. Please proceed.
My name's Felicia Bander. The so-called Bay Delta Conservation Plan does not conserve our precious waters of the Bay Delta. It could be called the Bring No Water to LA, but charge Angelinos a lot more taxes plan. Or the $9,000 per household, raise your rates and get nothing in return plan. 30 years ago, Californians worked to defeat the same plan called the Peripheral Canal. 63% of voters said no. Now politicians and agribusiness circumvent the people, knowing that the plan can't survive scrutiny. I support the One Water motion. We LA ratepayers demand cost and policy accounting of this $6 billion water boondoggle. For a fraction of the cost, we can build in-basin infrastructure to capture rainwater, recharge and clean our groundwater, and recycle and conserve our water resources. That's what I call a plan.
Thank you for the opportunity today to speak. My name is Amy Turnbull. I'm a 25-year resident of Sherman Oaks, California. I would like to urge the Council to vote no on 1. For the record, I would like to question the use of the word conservation in the BDCP program. Importing water to Los Angeles has nothing to do with conservation. A better use of funds, and as a taxpayer, one that I would readily endorse, would be to support a motion that embraces a big picture approach to water management. In addition, the Mayor's Great Streets program, we need to fund a Green Streets initiative. This initiative would support low-impact development, including bioswales, underground cisterns, and permeable surfaces. This would be a true conservation plan that would create a more sustainable water management system for Los Angeles. In closing, again, please vote no on item 1. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alexandra Nagy, and I'm the Southern California organizer with Food and Water Watch. I live in Chatsworth, and I've been organizing in the Valley against this proposed plan because of the threat that it will pose on the raising of rates and taxes by the Metropolitan Water District. Basically, with this motion, even commenting at this point in time is too soon. We need to do an independent cost-benefit analysis and study this project further and weigh it against all of our other One Water options before we can continue. And the Winnetka, Northridge South, Midtown, North Hollywood, Northeast North Hollywood, North Hills West neighborhood councils, just to name a few in the Valley, agree with us. We are disappointed with this comment motion, and a vote for this is a vote to raise our water bills, which will subsidize fracking and big agriculture in the San Joaquin Valley.
Daryl Gale, downtown resident. This proposed motion does not make sense to me. Why are we considering spending billions of dollars on tunnels that may not help us in our drought situation here in Southern California? And why do the ratepayers of Los Angeles have to foot the bill? When we were considering the feed-in tariff, I attended numerous meetings where each cent to be paid out was discussed and analyzed to death. I remember Jan Perry getting all upset over 17 cents. So I remember how much we analyzed it for the FIT. So can we just put this money into water recycling, water recharge, rain barrel programs like they have in Santa Monica? That way we can save our water, that is, if it ever rains again.
Very good, thank you. Tom Haberhorn, Doug Arsenault, Tori Wilkinson, Tony Wilkinson, your N's look like R's, and Walker Foley, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you, council members, and thank you for hearing my comment. My name is Thomas Habercorn. I'm speaking as a concerned citizen and potentially affected water ratepayer. After reading through the 100-plus pages of comments and conclusions associated with this agenda item, I would like to say that this is my water bill you are discussing. The latest cost estimate with interest was $67 billion. The director of the California Department of Water Resources has stated that a $51 to $67 billion estimate is reasonable. It's very alarming that the current estimate in this motion is the cost of this project without interest. Please protect ratepayers and make sure to do a thorough cost analysis before you move forward. Please pass the corresponding motion. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Doug Arsenault of the Valley Industry and Commerce Association, representing over 400 businesses in the city, surrounding areas that depend on the Bay Delta. The City of Los Angeles has the opportunity to take a proactive role in protecting our businesses and residents from water shortage that would risk our city's health, safety, and economy. A water shutdown resulting from the inadequate current infrastructure would result in the loss of more than 500,000 jobs and $55.6 billion in GDP for LA County in a single year of reconstruction. The Bdcp is the most cost-effective way of ensuring that our region has a reliable water supply for decades to come. In addition to preserving our primary statewide resource, cities should be investing in local water supply projects that help to diversify our overall water supply. This shouldn't be a conversation about doing one or the other. We need to do both. Urban ratepayers will undoubtedly reap the benefits of protecting this supply. If the council does nothing, then you are turning your backs on the physical and financial future of the people of Los Angeles. The Bdcp is an insurance policy to maintain reliable water supplies, and we urge you to support this motion. Thank you.
We're going in order, sir. You're next.
Oh, okay. His name was read first. So hi, my name is Walker Foley. I'm here with Food and Water Watch. And approving comments for the Bdcp at this point is no small action. The City of Los Angeles should really not submit comments on a project it hasn't thoroughly reviewed. So I'm urging you to oppose the motion proposed by Councilmember Fuentes on the grounds that the numbers cited in this motion are inaccurate according to an independent analysis, and that this project could cost up to $67 billion, which is a figure actually confirmed by DWR's Mark Cohen in the San Mercury News. So this is really a far cry from the numbers cited by the rate advocate Fred Pickle, which don't really account for the full cost of financing this project. I instead urge you to support the Correspondent 1 water motion, which will ensure a proper cost-benefit analysis of all of our options for water reliability. And to be clear, approving the Bay Delta Conservation Plan means unfairly raising water rates for LA ratepayers for a boondoggle project that will not benefit Los Angeles. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Tony Wilkinson from Panorama City, and I'm speaking in favor of the first motion for Mr. Councilmember Fuentes, because I believe that it's fair to allow our city's department to weigh in on a co-equal goal Bay Delta project that's not just about the conveyance system, but also about the urgent environmental restoration of the San Joaquin Bay Delta. That involves not only the security of the water system that this year is bringing us almost 80% of Los Angeles water supply from MWD, large amounts of that originally from the Bay Delta project, but also in the related state actions bringing us remediation funds for our San Fernando Valley aquifer, if we're lucky. And I think that the balanced contribution from the department is essential on this plan. The City Council will have plenty of time to weigh in one way or the other. I am in support of allowing the department to speak.
Connor Everts, Esperanza Vielma, Barbara Barragan Perea, and George Watland.
Thank you. Connor Everts, Southern California Watershed Alliance, and the new co-facilitator of the statewide Environmental Water Caucus. We have taken 6 months with professionals and way too many attorneys producing over 247 pages of response to the Bdcp. We think it's really an economic decision you have here to discuss, though, and I was at a legal water law conference last week where Dr. David Sundig, the economist from DWR, said that given all the uncertainties, financial uncertainties of who's going to pay for this in the long term, if he was a water agency and therefore a municipality, he wouldn't sign on to it now. I don't think we should. It's nice to say we want to do everything, but LA has to have priorities in their local water usage, and this is an opportunity to do that. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is George Watland. I'm director of the Angeles Chapter Sierra Club here in LA and a resident of the city. The Sierra Club and other Sierra Club chapters across California support sensible alternatives to the Bay Delta Giant Tunnels project. The giant tunnels will not solve California's water challenges. The Sierra Club supports robust alternatives to the tunnels that provide better long-term water security for all Californians and would have fewer negative environmental impacts. A healthy delta is essential to California's financial and environmental future. The tunnels are a risky and expensive proposition for California, and they provide a false sense of water security and encourage unsustainable use of water in cities and farms across the state. We support the Koretz-Bonin motion for an independent, peer-reviewed cost-benefit analysis of the impact of the Bay Delta project on city ratepayers. The estimates are much too low in the earlier study, and estimates now are between up to $65 billion. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Barbara Barragan-Perea, and I'm the Executive Director with Restore the Delta. We are urging you to support the Koretz-Bonin motion. First off, the Bay Delta Conservation Plan will not meet the co-equal goals that people in Southern California are looking for to be met because it will not increase water supply. The truth is California experiences drought about 40% of the time. In a normal year, have oversubscribed water rights by 5 times in the watershed. And the Bay Delta Conservation Plan will consequently not provide more water at this end, but it will not restore the fisheries as promised either. If you delve into the 40,000 pages in the plan and the EIR, it makes it clear that there will be net losses of all 3 runs of salmon fisheries, longthroat shad, delta smelt. Conditions will actually worsen. Last, the earthquake threat is overstated. Bottom line is it does not address the earthquake threat where losses would be experienced in the Delta.
Good afternoon. My name is Esperanza Vielma, and I'm from the Environmental Justice Action Group, a board member from the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District, and I'm here coming from Stockton. I'm also the founder and executive director of Cafe Coop, a business and social entrepreneur incubator in downtown Stockton. On the environmental justice communities, I'm basically here to ask that you look at an independent study and look and see how it will impact your environmental justice communities economically, and also there's a language barrier issue. The documents that are in English you can obtain for $6,000. Get a copy of the plan. For the Spanish-speaking community, they don't have access to that in their own language, and your other communities as well. And then the economic factor that will affect the environmental justice communities. And so, thank you.
Weston Labar.
Could I just say, Mr. Chair, as the speaker from Stockton, California, welcome to Los Angeles. If you haven't been here before, we have a wonderful observation deck on the top after the meeting.
And the folks from Restore the Delta, too. Welcome to Los Angeles.
That's right.
Jonas Minton, Mark Lipman, and Antonieta Villamil.
Hi, yes, I'm Weston Labar. I represent the South Bay Association of Chambers of Commerce. We have 16-member chambers, a handful of which are in the city of LA, including San Pedro and Wilmington, and we represent over 53,000 businesses in Los Angeles County. It's interesting for you to know that we've been looking at this issue for the last 3 years, and we strongly support option number 4 of the Bdcp. The business community of LA, a recent survey showed that 2 of the top 5 concerns of theirs were water reliability related. When you look at this issue, it's in my opinion, if you're looking at recycling water, conserving water, and the Bdcp on a multiple choice test, you would choose D. All of the above is the options that you need to implore. I'm here again. We made these same comments 2 weeks ago. We'll make these same comments in 2 weeks if we have to. We strongly support Bdcp option number 4. Thank you.
Jonas Minton, former Deputy Director of the California Department of Water Resources. First recommendation for you to understand the step-up provisions. BDCP would be funded by primarily Metropolitan, Westlands, and Kern. The bond underwriters are going to require step-up provisions. That means that if one drops out for whatever reason, financial inability to pay, that the others pick up the tab. Why is this important? On January 15th, Weston's general manager told their board, quote, "In a worst case, we file for bankruptcy." That moves the load to you. Second, understand the importance of removing the take or pay, instituting take or pay. Right now, Los Angeles only pays for the water you take. Bond underwriters will insist, if this project moves forward, that Los Angeles pay for water even if you don't receive it in a year like this, including any cost overruns. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Mark Lippman, Los Angeles resident and ratepayer. This is a complete outrage. We're being asked to give a blank check for something we don't even know what we're going to be paying for yet. You do not preserve the environment by destroying it. You do not help your residents by raising our rates on things like this. This is $67 billion plus we're talking about. We just got our social services cut by a tune of $64 billion to pay for the last bailout that California needed to make. Now we're being asked to cough up more money. We're talking about $9,000 more a year. I don't have another $9,000 to pay for this project. That's not going to give a cent of resources to our community. We need to start looking at more conservation and things we can do that aren't going to be lining the pockets of the rich folk up at the top. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Antonieta Villamil, and I'm a resident and a ratepayer, and I don't agree with this. I think that it's the City Council, the responsibility to protect me as a resident and as a ratepayer. This looks into a future that sounds more like water poisoning and water drainage out of our pockets, and I don't agree with this. I think it should be more investigation and more study about the cost and the consequences of this for all the people. Thank you.
Richard Atwater, Tim Piazzi from the Los Angeles Ventura Chapter of Building Industries Association, Tina Hossein, and Kirsten James.
Thank you. My name is Richard Atwater, Executive Director of the Southern California Water Committee. I did testify 2 weeks ago. Bdcp is the most cost-effective way of securing one of our least expensive sources of water supply statewide. This project will protect existing water supplies from earthquakes and help secure water supply reliability for Los Angeles and the rest of the state. Bdcp is not about new water supplies, it's about reliability. Some claim that we should only be investing in local water projects. This is not an either-or choice, however. Southern California leads the nation in water conservation, water recycling, stormwater capture, and groundwater management. And it will continue to invest many billions of dollars over the next 10 to 20 years to increase our local supplies. But local water supplies, although they're essential for our water future, but they cannot solve our problems alone. By having stable and reliable imported water supplies from both Northern California and the Colorado River is a key component to our overall regional needs. Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Tim Piaski, and I'm representing the Los Angeles Ventura Chapter of the Building Industry Association of Southern California. I'd first like to take this opportunity to commend staff for a very well-written draft letter responding to the draft Bay Delta Conservation Plan. The letter did a tremendous job of outlining the importance of a reliable Delta water delivery system in combination with local resource development and groundwater remediation as critical to the overall future reliability of the City of Los Angeles' water supply, and thus the citizens and businesses of the city that count on this water supply for their livelihood. The letter, however, did not recognize or support an alternative. Our industry, along with many other disparate interests, has determined that alternative number 4 is the best alternative to meet the goals of water supply reliability, Delta ecosystem restoration, and seismic risk minimization. For these reasons, we request that the comment letter be amended to include support for alternative number 4. Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Tina Hussein, and I'm here on behalf of the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce and our 1,600 member organizations. I'm here today to express our strong support for the BDCP, Councilman Fuentes' motion, and DWP's comments on the EIR-EIS. As we stated at the last committee meeting, securing a long-term baseline supply of water for LA is of paramount importance to our businesses. We are deeply concerned that in any given year, 50 to 80% of LA's water supply is in jeopardy due to fragile levees and ecosystem deterioration in the Delta. We support city efforts to develop additional local supplies and reduce its dependence on imported water. However, as noted in DWP's comments, local supplies and conservation alone are not enough to serve the city's short and long-term needs. Imported water from the Delta will still be needed to buffer the effects of annual variations in precipitation statewide. In sum, we see BDCP as a complementary strategy to DWP's increased investment in local supplies, not a substitute. The $2 to $3 increase in cost per household is an insurance policy worth investing in. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Kirsten James with Heal the Bay. If you didn't see it, a great report came out last week from NRDC and PPIC, Untapped Potential. It shows an analysis of a lot of the stormwater and other types of project for local water supply reliability. That combined with LADWP's Stormwater Capture Master Plan really completes the picture on local water. I'm concerned that the report and the proposed letter is too black and white and isn't sufficient in the analysis of the potential of local water solutions. It weighs too heavily on desalination, and it doesn't consider alternatives like the NRDC portfolio approach. With MS4 compliance looming, local water is going to be a huge part of that puzzle, combining the multi-benefit projects. We're very concerned that the ratepayer will be hesitant to pay for local water supply investments if this does go through as proposed. Prior efforts have been tabled. Polls have come out showing willingness to pay. So we need to ensure that the plan reduces exports and addresses local water at the same time. So we support further analysis of the local water component and want to work with you on this. Thank you.
Thank you. John Howland and David England.
Good afternoon. I'm John Howland with the Central City Association. CCA is a business advocacy organization representing over 450 businesses, employing over 350,000 people downtown and throughout the region. CCA supports the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, and Alternative 4 is outlined in its DEIR and draft environmental impact statement. Securing a long-term, reliable baseline supply of water for the city and the region is of paramount importance to our organization and our members. We believe that the BDCP, EIR, EIS, alternative number 4, best helps resolve both the conveyance and the ecosystem concerns in the Delta. And while we are concerned about the price of the project, we are more concerned about the cost of inactivity. The current water intake and delivery system is unsustainable and under threat from earthquakes and sea level rise. Doing nothing should not be and is not an option. And while CCA supports maximizing our in-basin sources and continuing to improve conservation and efficiency, this alone is not a sufficient answer.
Good afternoon. I'm David England, speaking on behalf of BizFed, the LA County Business Federation, a grassroots alliance of over 120 major business groups with more than 280,000 employers, including 80,000 here in the city of Los Angeles. We want to thank you, Chairman Fuentes, for your leadership in bringing forward the motion in item number 1. 25 million people from the Bay Area to San Diego rely on the San Joaquin River Delta for their drinking water, yet without critical upgrades to the Delta's water infrastructure, a single major earthquake in the Delta could knock out 30% of Southern California's drinking water supply for up to a year. Just imagine the dire public health, public safety, and economic consequences that would create for all of your constituents and for our entire region. Yet politicians from outside of LA who oppose this plan have been loud and vocal, and our own political leaders have been largely silent. Supporting today's motion in item 1 will be an important first step to get the city of Los Angeles to take a stand to protect water access for all Angelenos. Even beyond this particular motion, we hope that you will support alternative number 4 for all the reasons you've heard today. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. With that, colleagues, we're very fortunate to have Mark Cowan, Director of the California Department of Water Resources, with us here today to give us sort of a broad overview as to where we are and the timing of this process. And I'd also like to invite up Roger Patterson, Assistant General Manager of the Metropolitan Water District, to begin the conversation about the BDCP proposal. We'll look at it also from MWD's perspective as your customer to MWD, and then we'll bring up the Department of Water, Sanitation, and Ratepayer Advocate after this. Mr. Cowan, welcome.
Thank you very much, Chair Fuentes and council members, for the opportunity to address you all today. So just a little bit of background on the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, and then I'd like to try to provide some perspective on the importance of that plan to statewide water supply reliability. Already today you've heard a lot of descriptions of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. At its essence, it is a process to seek permits under the U.S. Endangered Species Act and the State Natural Communities Conservation Planning Act to help 56 different species recover while operating the state's two biggest water projects, the Central Valley Project and the State Water Project, allow them to operate in a more environmentally protective and secure way. If we've learned anything from the last 3 decades of legal battles over project operations, it's that we cannot have one without the other. Water supply will not be stabilized at the expense of the environment, and big investments in habitat restoration or flows for the ecosystem simply aren't going to happen without assurance of stable water deliveries. We've spent too much time and effort arguing about which stressor is causing the biggest portion of the damage in the Delta ecosystem, and it's time for a new approach where we can all collectively put our shoulders into addressing all of the stressors that are driving down populations of native fish in the Delta, and as a result of that, of course, decreasing the water supply reliability for much of California. And with that premise, the Bay Delta Conservation Plan provides the framework for lasting solutions. BDCP is a big proposal. There's no doubt about it, and it has necessitated a long, exhaustive planning process. We're not through that process. So despite some of the opinions expressed today, we're not asking for a decision from the City of Los Angeles, from Metropolitan Water District, or anyone else at this point on whether or not we should move forward. We're still in the planning phase. We're collecting public comment so that we can continue to refine and address issues raised and come up with the best proposal possible. And while drought activities have certainly diverted our attention in 2014, we still continue to make progress. At the beginning of June, we posted a draft implementing agreement that sets out further details for how participants in the plan will work together to implement the plan. And it also sets out more on the commitments and obligations and the nature of the regulatory assurances that would be provided by the plan. Public comment on the plan ends at the end of this July, and then we will go about the process of reviewing the, and no doubt many tens of thousands of comments that we will receive on the plan and consider what refinements need to be made moving forward. In the meantime, the Brown administration continues to work with the federal government, with state and federal water agencies and others on the remaining issues, including cost allocation and financing. We agree that we need to have better detail on cost allocation and financing than we currently have. The practical matter is that you have to get to a firm proposal before you can allocate costs and have a legitimate conversation among potential participants on who ought to pay how much. That said, we have very good cost estimates that are included in the plan. Make no mistake that we can talk about financing in many different ways, but costs expressed in 2010 present worth dollars are much different than costs expressed in term of pay as you go sort of expression. They're not incompatible. There's no confusion there. We can express the dollars any way you want to see them, and that information is included in the plan. We're at the point now that we have much of the detail we need to begin those conversations of cost allocation and financing in earnest. And if you take a look at the draft implementing agreement that we recently posted, I think you'll see some of that detail that's required. So that is definitely next on our list of things to do in continuing to develop the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. I think it's because of historical baggage and an easy water war narrative with the north-south divide, or maybe because it's been so long since the state tackled such a major water project improvement, BDCP gets a lot of attention. And in the press, BDCP is usually preceded by the word controversial. But I think most Californians can agree that the Delta, under the status quo, is unsustainable for both fish and people. Most Californians would agree that our biggest problems statewide include that our groundwater basins are declining dramatically in some regions. Many disadvantaged communities lack clean, affordable water. Native fish populations have declined to near historic lows. Floods threaten more than 7 million Californians that live in floodplains, and natural disaster, flood or earthquake, threatens many parts of California's water system. I think most Californians can agree on solutions as well. We need to use water as efficiently as possible and make greater gains in conservation. We need to increase the use of recycled water. We need to redouble our investment in integrated water management at the local and regional levels so that multiple agencies can continue to work across boundaries to improve flood control, water supply, water quality, and wildlife habitat in integrated, efficient ways. We need to invest statewide in more habitat restoration, fish passage, water storage that serves to cool salmon streams and improve water quality. We've got to expand water storage for all purposes, whether above ground or below ground. We must achieve sustainable, locally controlled management of our groundwater basins. And just aside, I think we have very good potential for doing that in our state legislature this year. We need to help vulnerable communities secure safe drinking water systems and invest in flood management. And most importantly, perhaps, we need to develop a financing strategy that leverages all the sources available to keep California's water systems working well. All of these problems and solutions are spelled out in Governor Brown's Water Action Plan. And I urge you all to take a look at this. We put it together and published it late last year. It's a very clear 5-year water action plan that gets to specific actions that we hope to prioritize over the next 5 years. The City of Los Angeles has a long-term vision for reliable water supply over the next 20 years that includes reduced reliance on supplies imported from the Delta, boost to water conservation, recycled water, more capture of storm water, and clean aquifers are underway under many different projects. That approach matches the state policy that was enacted with the Delta Reform Act of 2009 that calls for reduced reliance on the Delta as a source of water supply. At the state level, we've invested in the same sorts of programs that encourage that kind of self-sufficiency through our integrated regional water management approaches. And I won't get into the numbers here in detail, but over the past decade, we've dedicated at least $1.4 billion to new local water management projects that have leveraged about $3.7 billion in local dollars, resulting in about 2 million acre feet per year of water, are enough for 4 million California households. Very important investment and one that must be sustained. Investment in water conservation, recycling, stormwater capture, and desal is necessary, but from an economic point of view, does not offset the need for shoring up reliability in Delta supplies. Environmental necessity aside, from an economic standpoint, Bdcp is an excellent investment for Southern California. You've got to remember, we're talking about shoring up existing supply reliability, not dramatically increasing imports from the Delta. Without this investment, water supplies will continue to erode, requiring more and more expensive projects at the local level to keep pace. And this will be particularly challenging in light of climate change and decreasing reliability of Southern California's other imported sources from the Colorado and elsewhere. The fact is impossible to avoid. Los Angeles is not prepared now and will not be for many years to come to do without Delta supplies. The investment in Bdcp will stabilize those Delta supplies and is very reasonable in cost compared to the cost of replacing that keystone supply at the local level, even if there was enough time to implement those projects without harming the Southern California economy from water shortages. In essence, to pose the debate as choice between Bdcp or local projects or the Delta ecosystem or Delta water supplies is a false premise. Frankly, we need to do it all, and that's why we're working on so many fronts. To successfully cope with climate change and population growth, it's what all California water agencies and communities will need to do. Thank you very much.
Mr. Patterson.
Yes, good afternoon, Chair Fuentes, council members. A pleasure for me to be here. My name is Roger Patterson. I'm Assistant General Manager at Metropolitan Water District. For the public's benefit, Metropolitan is the regional wholesale provider of imported water from both Northern California and from the Colorado River. We provide just a little over half of the water that is delivered and used in Southern California. In addition, Metropolitan invests about $80 million a year of our ratepayers' revenue into local projects in partnership with our member agencies for projects such as recycling, groundwater remediation, desalination, and stormwater recharge. We usually invest about $20 million a year directly in conservation measures and cost share. This year, because of the drought, our board chose to double that figure to $40 million. About 30% of the water that is used in Southern California originates in the snowpack in Northern California, and that water is moved south through the San Joaquin Sacramento Delta through the State Water Project. As you've just heard, Mark Cowan described the conditions that we have now are just, they're not sustainable, and they continue to degrade whether you care about the environmental ecosystem in the Delta or whether you care about water supply reliability. They're both going down. And the fact of the matter is they have to both improve together if we're going to make progress. Metropolitan is the largest contractor on the State Water Project. Our contract is about half of the State Water Project annual supplies. This year is one of the worst years that we've seen in I'd say decades, but maybe longer, at least as long as the history that we have as far as drought. And it's a real reminder that to get through times like this, you have to have a system in place that can take advantage of the good years so that we can take water in the good years, compatible with the environment, put it away, and use that water to get through years like this. Metropolitan has been working with our 26 member agencies, and we've made considerable progress along those lines, particularly since the drought in the 1990s. We made major investments in conservation, in conveyance improvements in our area in Southern California, and in storage facilities in Southern California. And those investments are paying off this year in allowing us to get through a difficult time as well as we are able. Our 2010 Integrated Resources Plan that we developed for Southern California has us moving towards a less reliance on the Delta to meet our future needs in Southern California. At this point, we're about 45% of Southern California's supplies are met through local resources. By 2035, we see that getting close to two-thirds, so a significant improvement. In fact, all of the future demand that we see between now and 2035, which, if the projections are right, will have perhaps 3.5 million more residents in Southern California by 2035. We envision meeting all of that additional demand through additional conservation and local projects in Southern California. But in order to do that, we have to have reliable base supplies, and that's what the investments we've made in the Colorado River system are about, and that's what we are looking at as we look at State Water Project improvements through Bdcp. We will continue to do that with our member agencies so that we are equipped, if it is one of the previous witnesses says, if it ever rains again, we will be in a position to take advantage of those supplies and put them away to use them wisely. We've invested billions of dollars in the existing system, but it's aging, and we are seeing the shortfalls as far as compatibility between water supply reliability and the environment. And that's really what this Bay Delta Conservation Plan is about, is trying to figure out how to make both work and make them work together so that we have baseline supplies that allow us then to move forward with our local supply development. It's been a little over 7 years, $200 million plus that has been invested so far by the state, the federal government, and the public water agencies to get us to this point. I think if we continue to see the leadership we've seen through Governor Brown and his folks and the Obama administration, we should, I think in 2015, have a final plan that then all of us can look at that plan, do our independent views, and then make some decisions. When our board started this process, we developed a set of criteria at Metropolitan in 2007. The City of Los Angeles members to our board at that time were very active in putting that criteria together. It's things like water supply reliability, quality, flexible pumping operations that will help us reduce the conflicts we now see with fish species, restored habitat, reduce seismic risk, and the ability to deal with climate change. It's that criteria coupled with what's it going to cost? How are these costs going to be allocated? As Mark Cowan said, we're not there yet. And there's additional work that needs to be done. But that criteria and a fair allocation of the costs is what I believe our board will be looking at as they prepare to make the final decisions. The last point I would emphasize is the investment that we're looking at making for Metropolitan, which if you look at the numbers on the table, the estimates, including interest, and you allocate it across the Southland and what we think would be a fair share, it's about $5 per month per household that we would be looking at. That would be more or less depending on how much metropolitan water you get. And that is not to purchase additional water from the north. It's really to stabilize and make the supplies that we are now getting more reliable for the decades to come. So I really do appreciate the chance to be here and make those comments.
Very good. Colleagues, we're very fortunate to have both Mark and Roger here to help us understand sort of where we are in the process, and wanted to see if any of you wanted to take the opportunity to speak to the Director of the Department of Water Resources or MWD. Mr. Kretz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, for Mr. Patterson, I talked with Jeff Keitlinger yesterday about this, and obviously, as you've pointed out, the board is not yet formally in support. It just continues to look at the issue. And he said MWD does have concerns. I wonder if you could elaborate on the concerns that the agency has.
Well, it's been a long march. When we signed the planning agreement, we thought in 3 years we'd have a plan that we could look at. So it's now at 7. Kind of at its core for us is what's it going to cost and what are you going to get? It's a typical business deal. And I think more and more we're seeing what we will get as far as water supply reliability starting to come into focus. I still have some concerns because that's not quite landed yet. And then we have in this planning agreement that's on the street sort of the cost split between what the public water agencies would pay and the state and federal government, but there's no allocation between the public water agencies, and there's close to 60 of them. And I think my biggest concern, and I think Jeff's concern also, is we want to make sure that when it comes to what's Metropolitan going to pick up out of that piece, which is 70% of the cost of the plan, that our benefits are in line with what we're expected to pay. And that negotiation is just starting.
Now, the cost estimate of around $5 a family, does that include property taxes and other factors like that?
That's kind of the all-in cost for what's in the plan. So it's capital, interest, operational costs, and pumping cost. It's everything that is in the plan, including interest costs.
That also includes, just on that point so I don't forget it, does that also include sort of an anticipated, well, I shouldn't say anticipated, the potential for cost overruns, and what are the percentages thereabouts?
Well, the cost estimate, and Mark Cowan could speak to this, the cost estimate is using, particularly for the tunnels, a little over a 30% contingency, which is a little bit higher than the average would call for making the estimate, but these large infrastructure projects are hard to estimate. They've done three separate cost estimates on this, so it does include those contingencies in the estimate.
And for Mr. Cowan, a few questions. First of all, there's pretty clear evidence that efficiency improvements and wastewater reuse and stormwater capture and other similar projects work and work well. But there's not much attention paid to them in the water resources funding and the state water bond. Why is that? Why is there so much more of a focus on the BCDP?
I'm not sure I understand, but I would disagree with that conclusion that there's not much attention paid to those types of activities in both past bonds and the proposed bonds that are on the table and under discussion of the legislature today. As I mentioned in my opening comments, we've funded something on the order of $1.4 billion out of state GO bonds for those types of local projects over the last decade. Any of the bond proposals that I've seen discussed over the past few weeks in the Capitol continue to provide hundreds of millions of dollars for integrated regional water management, plus dedicated funding for groundwater cleanup and for water quality improvements. So a significant portion of the bond would go towards those purposes.
Well, it doesn't look to me to be a significant enough portion, and my concern is whether or not we think the tunnels are a great idea. I think most would agree that with all the different steps, including potential litigation, this could take 15 to 20 years before we actually have the tunnels. And since, despite having the foresight at MWD of creating very significant storage, I think we could be done with about half of that storage by the end of the year, and not that long afterwards, if this drought continues as badly as it is, it could be all gone. So how do we deal with the more urgent problem and actually give ourselves the local water solutions that we need in time to actually deal with this drought?
It's going to take investment, and that's where your jobs get tough, dealing with ratepayers and coming up with local funding to make required investment. I can tell you this from my experience. I don't expect the costs for water management or the value of water to go down anytime in our lifetimes. It's just going to continue to escalate. We're going to have to invest more in water if we want to maintain the kind of reliability and the kind of ecosystem management that we all want to see.
And a question on the earthquakes. My understanding is that the area that the plan is focused on, in the Delta, the closest major fault is around 40 miles away. But along the length of the project, particularly in the Tehachapi's, faults are actually much closer and perhaps much more likely to cause problems. I don't think there's any funding or focus on those potential earthquakes. How do we address those, and why not? And at the end of the day, don't we have the earthquake threat even after we've spent all this money on
Sure.
the new
We're never
tunnels?
going to earthquake-proof California. It's a matter of risk management. We're talking about comparing unengineered levees in the Delta compared to engineered elements of the State Water Project. There simply isn't any comparison in terms of the risk of failure. That said, that doesn't mean that an earthquake couldn't provide problems for any of our water management facilities. There's no doubt about it. But in terms of measuring risk, the best investment is to decrease the risk associated with unengineered levees in the Delta collapsing under a seismic event.
And as far as water reliability, I know this year in the drought, we were looking at getting no water, and I think we're now at 5% with a little bit of an improvement. That hardly seems like a high level of water reliability. So if we put this much money into a project and we're still in the same situation where with climate change and everything else, we could even have less water access from the north. Is this really a cost-effective way for us to guarantee local water reliability when we have all kinds of projects that can make use of the water we have and we know we have?
So just a couple of responses. First of all, just from an economic standpoint, it's pretty simple economics that you implement the most cost-effective projects first and delay investment in more expensive projects that return less. So we have a general loading order for what projects we select and how they're implemented. If we invest local funds in local projects that are only chasing a declining level of supply that you receive from the Delta, you stay at the same level of water supply reliability, but those incremental costs continue to increase and increase. So if you're going to deal with further threats from climate change, further needs from population growth, the costs simply become astronomical. And it's a matter of just simple economics that investing in the existing system, modernizing it, trying to reduce the slow degrade in the water supply reliability that we've seen over the last 3 years is economically superior approach. It doesn't offset the need for additional investment at the local level, but as you'll hear today and have heard already, it's complementary.
Yeah, well, personally, I don't have a position yet, but I think, as you can tell, I'm probably pretty skeptical, and I have a feeling that not only will much of the water go to farming in the Central Valley, not that I mind that, but not at our expense, but I also fear that a fair amount of that is going to fracking activity. And I know the governor is both a fan of fracking and a fan of this project, and it obviously creates a tremendous amount of millions of gallons of indefinitely polluted water. And in other places in the country, we're having a lot of complaints about that. Is my concern misplaced, or will a lot of that water go to fracking activities that we would rather not see happen?
Well, I'll leave the ethical debate over fracking to those that know more about it than I do. But from a water supply perspective, it's my understanding that we use no more than a few hundred acre-feet per year for fracking in California. That's compared to millions of acre-feet that we expect to export from the Delta. So it's not a big concern in terms of the water supply perspective. The issues relative to fracking need to be resolved relative to the impacts that fracking causes, not as a result of its water supply implications to California.
And lastly, I'd just point out that fracking's been associated with earthquakes all over the country. And if we're doing this partly to deal with the danger of earthquakes, spending money to provide more water to create more earthquakes seems like it's somewhat counterproductive. So I
appreciate that.
I hope in the process we look at that and how we allocate our water for that purpose.
Very good, colleagues. Any additional questions for either Mr. Patterson or Mr. Cohen?
And then we're going to vote after that?
What we're going to do then, Mr. Labange, is go ahead and thank you very much for your participation.
I have a question.
With your question, as Mr. McDaniel, Mr. Khalil, and Dr. Pickle make their way up to the table here, Mr. Labange, your
All
question.
right, 51 Tehachapi earthquake. What happened to the aqueduct system for Los Angeles, DWP? Maybe DWP knows. 94 earthquake in Northridge, which had some touches up there. Any damages to the aqueduct, do we know? Or have we looked at the 51 quake?
Minor damages that didn't cause any significant outages. We've got a 50-year-old project, so it requires a lot of maintenance. It's hard sometimes to tell what the after effects of any seismic event are relative to that long-term maintenance, but the system has survived just fine over 50 years.
And then the next thing, the one water thing. I'm 100% for Mr. McDaniel to go right down and turn the switch on the East Valley Water Reclamation. Could you do that right now?
We couldn't because it's not built, constructed right now.
How much of it was constructed?
You're talking about the original recycled water project out there for tertiary water. That actually could be put into operation.
What are you doing
tonight?
Permitted. What are you doing tonight? All right, the other thing I did want to say, where water flows, food grows. I'm for the Central Valley. I just want to support agriculture. I think it's very important for this state. The other thing, too, is I have some friends in this room on both sides, so I want to make everybody happy, which I'm not going to make everybody happy. If Mulholland walked in the room right now, I would listen to Mr. Mulholland. I do believe that water is important for all of California. Second to Mulholland, in my mind, is Governor Edmund G. Brown Sr., who was a visionary and worked real hard. San Francisco District Attorney, made his way to the governor's house and brought the state together in many ways. I do support these statewide projects, and I think if we listen to Jerry Brown, in a lot of ways, back when he was a governor the first time, there were things that we would have been able to do that we would have avoided now, especially a lot of the green things that we're trying to do. I believe in the concerns that Mr. Koretz has stated on those concerns that being about fracking. I saw somewhere like in Oklahoma, like they had 4 earthquakes in like a decade, and then they've had like 48. And I don't think it's because of the change in country music that they're having all those earthquakes. So I just think this is very important. I'll listen to Water and Power, but I wanted to, Mr. Chair, they're going to call me over to another committee, but I will come back here because this is an important vote, and I instructed the sergeant such. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Labange. And with that, why don't we have our city departments speak to the comment letter that you all have drafted for us, and then we'll round it out with our ratepayer.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm Jim McDaniel, Senior Assistant General Manager for the Water System with the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Thank you, Chair Fuentes, for providing this opportunity for us to review our proposed response. You have before you our submitted written response to both the motions related to the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. I'd like to briefly go over several of the key items in our responses and then take any questions that you may have. The city's long-term vision for a reliable water supply over the next 20 years includes reduced reliance on imported supplies through additional local resource development. Many of these local resource projects are already underway in the areas of conservation, recycled water, stormwater capture, and groundwater cleanup. Key to this strategy for local supply development is access to reliable backup supplies during dry periods when local supplies are less available. The city's primary backup supply is the Delta. This year, over 70% of the city's water supply will come from the Delta. Ensuring the reliability of this supply is a key component to the city's strategy for local resource development. Before I continue further, I think it would be important to highlight 2 historical impacts to the city's water supply that have led us to this long-term vision. Just during the course of my career, a little over 30 years, half of the LA Aqueduct supply has been reallocated for environmental enhancements in the Mono Basin and Owens Valley. This coming fiscal year, the Los Angeles Aqueduct deliveries are expected to be at only 37,500 acre-feet, the lowest in history, measuring only 7% of the city's needs. Additionally, groundwater basin contamination has cut our local groundwater supplies in half. Consequently, the city now relies on MWD for over half of its water supply in an average year, and more than 70% during the current drought, with most of that water coming from the Delta. Recovering groundwater supplies and developing new alternative local supplies to replace reallocated LA Aqueduct water will take years, if not decades, and will require significant investments. We are in the process of evaluating the full potential for local supply development over the next 10 to 20 years, but preliminary estimates show that the local supplies by themselves will not be sufficient to meet all of the city's future water demands, especially during dry years like the one we're in now. If we are successful in reaching our local supply goals, the city will still have significant dependence on imported supplies, primarily from the Delta. For example, if I could kind of wave a magic wand and meet all of our local supply development goals that we've set for the next 20 years in a single day, and the city were to experience a dry year, I would still be purchasing half of the city's water from MWD, and the vast majority of that would be coming from the Delta. As a result, we anticipate that local resource development and the Bdcp will be complementary and critical to ensuring the reliability of the city's water supply. They should not be viewed as competing with one another. The ability to produce water from the Delta is currently facing many risks, including earthquakes, levee failures, ecosystem decline, sea level rise, climate change, and fish restrictions, which, if ignored, will have serious impacts on the city's water supply reliability and economy. There's an opportunity now through the Bdcp to see how a long-term sustainable solution in the Delta will address the co-equal goals of ecosystem restoration and water supply reliability. Local resources development, groundwater remediation, stormwater management, and environmentally sustainable delta water supplies are critical and complementary efforts needed to ensure the city's water supply. Again, BDCP is not an alternative to local supply development, but it is a complementary investment in the reliability of the city's principal backup supply from the Delta, which city ratepayers have been relying on and financially supporting for the past 50 years. I want to conclude by addressing two of the common recurring themes that have risen in opposition to the BDCP. The first has to do with the concept of expanding the BDCP scope to include local water resource development by wholesale and retail water agencies statewide and reducing the size of the Delta Conveyance Facility by 2/3. The State Natural Resources Agency has analyzed this alternative and concluded that the smaller project does not meet the biological goals and objectives of the BDCP and requires over 70% of the State Water Project and Central Valley Project deliveries to be diverted through the existing South Delta intakes, resulting in increased potential take for protected and endangered species. Operating the existing South Delta facilities more does not substantially change the unnatural flow patterns in the Delta. When the South Delta facilities are operating, their reverse flows in several rivers in the South Delta, which adversely impact fish. Cost savings from the smaller project's reduced conveyance capacity are not sufficient to overcome the reduced level of the benefits. The smaller project reduces Delta conveyance capacity by 67%, but only reduces the construction cost by 25%. The single tunnel approach provides no operational redundancy for maintenance, inspection, outage, or emergencies. And as an operator of an aqueduct system where we do have that redundancy, I can assure you that that's critical. The second theme has to do with the idea that the BDC project will divert DWP funding away from local supply development and that the city would be better off spending that money on local water supply development. The city is not locked into any particular fixed cost for the BDCP. We will pay for the BDCP cost through the purchases of supplemental water from Metropolitan Water District. If BDCP costs are assessed volumetrically by MWD, as LA reduces its dependence on MWD, our costs for BDCP will also be reduced. The city is in a unique position in that we have multiple options available to us for local resource development that most of the other water agencies in Southern California don't have. As we reach our goals for conservation, recycling, stormwater capture, and groundwater recovery, we will buy less water from MWD and therefore pay less for the BDCP. The LADWP does not view the BDCP and the local water supply development as in competition, but rather views them as complementary. Our Board of Water and Power Commissioners has adopted board resolutions both in support of BDCP and directing staff to accelerate the development and implementation of the local water supply program. That concludes my remarks. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, honorable council members. Adel Hashkhalil, I'm the Assistant General Manager with Sanitation. I'll be very brief. We've been working very closely with our partners in Department of Water and Power, not on this issue alone, but also on increasing our local water supply and making Los Angeles a sustainable city. As you know, we worked closely together on the 2006 Integrated Resources Plan, and we've been very successful to work with the stakeholders to increase our local water supply and to implement many institutional changes and many programs and projects to address and increase local water supply. The highlight of it is the Low Impact Development Ordinance that requires all developments and redevelopments to capture 3/4 of an inch of rain on site. We need to continue investing in our local water supply. We need to continue investing in addressing and managing stormwater, which is a huge liability for the city, not only from a flooding issue, but also from water quality. And if we are able to manage it in a sustainable, integrated way we can not only address the water quality issues, but also we can improve flooding, address flooding, and also increase our local water supply. And we need to continue to invest in this. And as Mr. McDaniel has mentioned, we believe local water supply is a complementary measure. We believe that needs to continue investment. We cannot take the foot off the pedal. We need to continue moving forward, and we need to continue stressing the importance of that investment to address the different issues that we have in Los Angeles, not only water supply, but also water quality and flooding. And I think if we do it in an integrated way, as we have proven, as we have shown, we're not only addressing the water quality, we're also recharging our groundwater, we are improving the conditions of flooding our communities, but also improving the overall quality of life. So our commitment is to continue. We ask you to continue the support of the local efforts that we're doing here in Los Angeles. We are partnering with our partners in Water and Power, and we believe that needs to continue, and that investment is needed, and we believe that's a complementary effort that needs to be looked at to debate at the conservation plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Pickle.
Excuse me for a minute while I get a presentation started.
Sure.
This PowerPoint presentation summarizes a written report that was provided to this committee on May 7th. The Bay Delta Conservation Plan and its costs are usually quoted as a single number, $25 billion in 2012 dollars. That does not include interest. That's captured other ways. Neither legislation nor voter approval is required for the conveyance component, which is about $17 billion. The co-equal goal of more reliable water is covered by the conveyance component. The remaining $8 billion is for the improvements in the Delta ecosystem, and those have to be funded through state taxes and other potential sources, hopefully some federal funding of ecosystem projects. The proposed water bond is discussed in this context because it provides or will provide some of the funding for the ecosystem component of this. Unlike the pre-approval of the conveyance plan, a voter approval is required for the funding of the water bond. DWP's estimate of the conveyance costs on a per household basis per month is $2.04, and this is just for the conveyance component, not the water bond. That's this $2.04. We break that down into two components. The conveyance cost on an expected case of about $1, plus ecosystem improvements in the Delta of a slightly larger amount for a total cost of $2.13. But we're talking about so many uncertainties in this process, we thought it would be useful to look at best and worst cases. Best cases involve us being as successful as we hope in terms of local water development and having low interest costs and other components. And the worst cases assume we're not as successful in local water development and costs or interest rates cause other costs to go up, for example. But household cost in terms of what is charged through ratepayers only tells about half the story. There are other household costs in terms of tax burdens through state bond costs. When we look at the cost of the water bond, net of benefits that ratepayers receive, we end up with a range of household costs from $1 to $9 per month per household. And bearing in mind, in most cases, the household tax impact, either through income tax, property tax, sales tax, or some other tax burden, is about half of this cost. In terms of the scenarios, what do we consider in terms of scenarios? First set of scenarios revolve around DWP's water portfolios. What percentage of MWD deliveries are we going to be taking, which conversely means what are we going to be able to supply from Owens or local water. Another component of that is what is the level of the Delta water exports in terms of lower, planned, or higher. And there are low expectations for higher in this context. Expected DWP reduces the MWD water use and increases local supply in terms of our expected scenario. We also looked at cost scenarios. We look at higher, lower, and expected costs and bonded debt in the process. So this considers both project cost and interest rates in the process. So interest rates are included in our analysis. And we look at more than a 2-to-1 range in terms of expected debt payments. Those are the debt payments from $1.5 billion per year down to slightly under $0.7 billion per year. And we're assuming, as our expected case, costs as planned with no capitalized interest, which means no capitalization of the interest during the construction process, which increases the overall cost to the consumers long run. DWP water contractor scenarios look at higher, lower, and expected or current deliveries to the water contractors, and we assume that money follows water. That is, it's the current cost allocation method where water is allocated according to use levels. It's important to understand in this process that the current portfolio for DWP has about 44% of the water coming from the Delta in a typical year, and 12% coming from local water. The DWP plan portfolio assumes a substantial, nearly fourfold increase in the amount of local water percentage. We believe that's a stretch goal. We consider this to be one of the optimistic scenarios and not our expected scenario. But at the same time, that scenario also reduces our carrying cost for Bdcp water. What's our conclusion? We believe our report of May 7th remains valid. Bdcp is affordable to almost all city households. In terms of policy actions, in terms of what we want to maximize to reduce our cost of the Bdcp, one, we want to try to maximize local water supply to reduce dependence on imports, but we still need to move ahead with this to improve the reliability of supply. We need to try to maximize any federal funding for Bdcp improvements and LA water projects. And we have to continue to push for full participation by state water project and Central Valley water project contractors. In the process, we want to use the lowest cost Bdcp conveyance project, and we need to continue to push for money following water among water contractors. In this process, we've received some comments on our report from NRDC and from Food and Water Watch. We believe NRDC overfocuses on the worst case endpoints of assumptions which we used and ignores the range of interest rates we've considered, the range of MWD shares and conversely other contractors, the range of rate methods for collection. We've considered assessed value or property tax collection as some of the possibilities, and the money follows the water approach, and the range of wet and dry years. NRDC and Food and Water Watch err in over-focusing on extreme project costs. We considered a minus 20 to plus 30% range in project costs, and then the Food and Water Watch's $67 billion number includes interest, and it gives a 268% higher endpoint for these numbers. We think that's unrealistic. Their criticism about interest rates not being included, that's not correct. Interest rates are considered in the cost per customer per month numbers. Thank you.
Very good. Colleagues, questions for our departments? Mr. Vice Chair Blumenfield.
Just a quick question on one of the charts that you were putting forward. I think it was page 2 or 3 or something. It was about the table with the 3x3 and the DWP net of DWP benefit. Could you elaborate on what that means and how you calculate the DWP benefit?
We considered in the water bond costs that where Southern California would benefit. For example, if the water bond included specific funds for San Fernando groundwater remediation, that'd be a benefit, and that we count that as included as reducing our net cost, because ultimately we have to have those groundwater supplies remediated in any case.
Okay, so when you talk about the monthly household and it's net, so we might actually be paying a little bit more, but we're getting benefit. So this is the additional thing, and the types of things. The groundwater recharge obviously or cleanup is the big one. What is it?
And something that would be negative where we wouldn't be getting benefit would be if Northern California storage projects were included in the bond, where MWD has already invested in storage projects for Southern California.
On this point, Mr. Blumenfield, sorry to interrupt, but I think it's important to understand that as the ratepayer advocate, Office of Public Accountability, you're looking at the total potential impact to the ratepayers. The conversation that's before us now, colleagues, I know you're aware of this, but for the benefit of the audience, is that we're speaking to BDCP, and there's a real potential that there will be a water bond on the ballot, and if it were to be passed, it appears that this would be sort of the overall impact to the ratepayer. So I just want to underscore that, because I have heard lots of conversations where folks sort of think that BDCP and the water bond are all one item, and they are not. But I do appreciate the analysis as a potential complete impact to the ratepayer. So I just wanted to highlight that point.
And in many cases, for certain rate questions, costs would be allocated into the bond versus the rates, but the ultimate household cost might be the same.
Thank you. Mr. Koretz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, a comment. I appreciate the efforts in the report by staff, but I would put out my motion requests an independent, peer-reviewed cost-benefit analysis of the BDCP, yet the report quotes from a report by the ICF International, one from the Brattle Group, and one by Dr. Rose at USC. None of those are independent. They're all funded by money associated with proponents of the project, and they're not peer-reviewed. So although I recognize there is a considerable effort put into that report, it's not actually responsive to my motion, and doesn't allow me to really make a complete informed decision on the project. Now, we're not deciding whether we're supporting the project yet. We're just deciding on a comment letter. But I don't feel that's an objective analysis that I was asking for. So I will ask that on my motion we hold that item in committee and ask for what we originally asked for, which is a fully independent, peer-reviewed analysis. And I know there's some other expert reports that came to a different conclusion. Those weren't included at all. So I'd like to see more objectivity in that and another crack at it. As far as the report itself, the most confusing element of that to me is that it talks about the alternative water supplies that will be developed under the Urban Water Management Plan and Mayor Garcetti's goal of reducing imported water by 50% by 2025, which I do think is achievable if we really dive into it. But it then cites economic studies whose conclusions assume that we actually make no reduction in our water usage. So you have a conflict that really makes no sense in the analysis. One, that we dramatically reduce our usage, and one, that we don't reduce them at all. So how did we combine those two reports and come to that conclusion?
You want to answer that?
Yes, Councilman Kretz, I'm David Pettyjohn. I'm the Director of Water Resources for LA Water and Power. What we did is we tried to do a conservative approach. So what we, when we didn't include any of the reductions in local water supply purchases from Metropolitan, we were essentially saying that this is the worst case scenario. What would the cost be to us if we didn't develop local resources? And that's what you saw in our response.
Well, it seems like the two can't really be combined. So if you take another crack at this, I'd like to actually have us use all the assumptions that we really make in the same thing. Because it seems like we're trying to have it both ways. And one place we assume that we won't reduce our demand at all. Another place we reduce it by half. It just doesn't seem coherent. My other question is, do we have a backup plan? What if the voters don't approve a water bond on the ballot? Who pays for it? And I understand that although ag interests north of our area get a lot of the water, they may not necessarily be in financial position to actually pay what we think, and we're assuming they pay their share. If they're not capable of paying their share, what's our backup plan? Because I think we're on the hook for it.
I'm confused by your question, Mr. Kretz. If the water bond weren't to pass, how does that sort of relate with the BDCP thing? I'm sort of lost because I want to understand the question. If you wouldn't mind asking again.
Well, a good portion of the remaining funding of the BDCP comes from the water bond. What happens if it doesn't pass?
Well, my understanding is that the water bond and the BDCP aren't directly linked to one another, so the funding for BDCP that you see in our analysis isn't dependent upon dollars from the water bond.
So we're assuming no dollars from the water bond are necessary to build the BDCP.
Well, what we're assuming in our analysis is that there are no dollars from the water bond that will go for the construction of the conveyance facilities. Now, the statewide benefit portions of the BDCP, there is an assumption that those will not be paid for by the water purveyors, but those are statewide benefits and they'll be paid for by statewide funding. It could come from a water bond or some other statewide public benefit funds.
And what happens if the agriculture interests in the Central Valley, which some feel have pretty spotty financial capabilities, aren't able to pay what would be their fair share? Are we not then on the hook for covering that?
Well, it was like Mark Cowan said, that's going to be something that the future is going to take a look at. We don't have that type of an agreement with the Central Valley farmers as of yet. So we'll just have to see what the actual financial arrangement is going to be when it's finally negotiated. But having said that, if you assume that Southern California water users are paying 50% of the State Water Project's share, and the State Water Project is paying 50% of the total project's share, and the CVP contractors, which are primarily ag contractors in the Central Valley, are paying the other 50%. If the entire CVP were to drop out, it would essentially double your costs for the State Water Project contractors. So that's kind of a rough justice, but that's a pretty extreme scenario.
Mr. Cowan, if you wouldn't mind weighing in on sort of, because again, I want to underscore here that there's a real distinction between the water bond and this project, and in case I'm mistaken, I need your assistance here.
Thank you, Chair Fuentes. I appreciate the opportunity to try to provide some clarity. You're absolutely right. There is no direct connection between a water bond this year, next year, or 10 years from now relative to the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. We are under an obligation under the Natural Communities Conservation Planning Act to show that we have a credible financing plan, and that includes the stream of funding from public sources necessary to fund the public component of the plan over the yet to be determined but now planned at 50-year life of the plan. So certainly a water bond would be one source of contribution towards those public costs, but direct appropriations or appropriations from the federal government could be other sources for those funds. So we are not linking this water bond or any particular water bond to the obligation to show that we have a complete financing plan for the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. I just also note that in all of the discussions we've had over the previous years in developing the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, each of the participating public water agencies has committed to the notion that they're going to pay for their benefits received. So there has not been any discussion about backstopping or transfer of costs under failure to pay. We'll be working out details as to what happens under those circumstances as we move forward, but that's not a tenet that anybody has used in negotiating to date. I want to just make one final point, if I could, that may provide some information. The state treasurer is doing an analysis of the Bay Delta Conservation Plan financial feasibility. We expect that there will be a draft plan perhaps in July or at least this summer. This comes from an independent constitutional officer of the state, so I hope that would qualify as an independent review. Thank you.
And so based on what you said, obviously it's something that we should be keeping an eye on to make sure that that remains the case, that we're not the default entity that's on the hook.
Definitely be in your interest.
Thank you.
Mr. Kretz, any additional questions?
No.
Dr. Pickle, if you could just sort of round out the part about the water bond and all, because again, I think it's a really important sort of distinction that we should appreciate, and thank you, Director Cowan, for the information about that independent source, but I look to you, of the ratepayer advocate, charter approved, independent, not paid for by any interest, to give us some additional comment.
Part of the reason we included the state water bond in our discussion is because of the co-equal goals. But as I said at the start, the conveyance component is the one thing being committed to in this process. And the ecosystem improvements are funded by one or more water bonds and perhaps other sources. That's separate from the conveyance component of the Bdcp.
Very good. Colleagues, any additional questions?
Some questions,
Mr. Weiser.
Thank you. And I'm still struggling with a cost issue, because although the draft letter states that it is of paramount importance that costs do not impact the ability to invest adequately in local resource projects, and we've done an analysis as to what the cost may mean for ratepayers, that doesn't take into account our own possible rate increases in the future for our own infrastructure, correct? Or did your analysis capture that?
In terms of my analysis, we just looked at the incremental impact of the Bdcp.
So that did not take into account our own needs locally, and that what that may mean for our own need to increase our own rates for our own infrastructure, correct?
No, it didn't. It focused just on the incremental impact of this project.
And do we have a forecast or some plan in place as to, I know it's kind of dangerous to put, say when and how we're going to put some rate increases so early in the process if we are planning to do some, but I'm just wondering if we have that plan and if we are taking that into account with any type of obligations we may have with this plan.
Mr. Weiser, I'll jump into the pool here. Rate increases are inevitable, irrespective of what is going to happen with BDCP or the water bond. And the potential for us to be able to sort of offset some of those costs with the passage of a water bond, especially now that both the WOLC and Perea bill seem to be the ones that are at least apportioning some more opportunities for us to offset those potential costs. I'd love to hear from the department sort of what is sort of anticipated on the horizon, because this conversation happens irrespective of whether we support BDCP or not.
Yeah.
There will be additional costs. There will be additional rate increases. I think our challenge is to figure out how to mitigate those to the best of our ability and ensure reliable supply. So with that...
And are there offsetting opportunities with this?
So rather than getting into rates, because that can be a whole different thing, and I would need Dr. Pickle, let me talk about costs a little bit. Costs of reliability. With the BDCP, what we're looking at is getting reliability for about 250,000 acre feet in a dry year. With our local supply program that we're committed to and moving forward on, we're looking at about 258,000 acre feet of dry year reliable supply. So a comparable amount of dry year supply. The cost that we estimate, the current present value cost of the local supply projects is going to be about $2.5 billion. The present value for the department's share of BDCP is about $0.55 billion. So we need to do both of these. It's not one or the other. They're complementary. But when you look at the cost, local supply projects are expensive. But as Adele pointed out, they have multiple benefits, too. You've got stormwater collection, flood control, recreational. So there's reasons to invest in those local supply, and we're going to do that. But when you look at the approximately equal numbers of acre feet of dry year supply availability, you're looking at 2.5 billion, 0.55 billion.
Okay. And my other question concerns, at the last meeting, the NRDC said that the EIR should have studied local water supply augmentation as a full-bodied alternative. We heard some comments like that as well today in public comment. And given everything we've heard that we are on track to do that, where are we with in terms of fully studying this and before we move forward with any action or position from the City of Los Angeles? Just to clarify that.
On the local water supply project, so in our urban water management plan, we pretty much laid out a pretty detailed plan for how to reach those goals by 2035. Mayor Garcetti and Mayor Villaraigosa before him had both charged the department, what can you do about accelerating those goals? So we're in the final stages of putting together what the costs associated and the feasibility of compressing that schedule and getting those projects done by 2025, and also putting, unlike the urban water management plan, which did not have a detailed kind of rate analysis on it, we actually have a rate analysis on this. This has been now reviewed internally, and we're getting some stakeholder comments, and then we'll be bringing that out formally for comment here probably within, Dave, what, the next month or so? Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Kretz.
Yes, two things. So one, I'd like to offer an amendment of one word to the comment letter.
So we'll get to that point there, Mr. Kretz, because I have been working with your staff, I think, or the mayor's office on those amendments. So I just want to make sure that we don't have any additional questions for our departments or our independent ratepayer advocate.
No further questions.
I was returned from committee, but I did brief the reports, and as I stated earlier, I think this is important and as we move forward. But also I see our Bureau of Sanitation here, which is important. And I just want to say one thing, Mr. Chairman. The toughest job we have, in addition to this, is the fact that all the water that's in the river now and all the uses we're going to call on, we've got to leave enough water in the river. I don't want to take it all out, okay? You got that, Adele? Yep. Thank you.
All right, you got it, Adele? Good. All right, that will not be one of the amendments that we're offering today. So colleagues, although it's very important, Mr. LaBonge, colleagues, this committee has devoted, I think, a significant amount of time in meetings to the topic of the city's water supply, and we will continue to do so. We've discussed previously that Los Angeles must do more to increase its water security and water supply, which is why I think, for me at least, the San Fernando Basin and the remediation thereof is of critical importance, especially since we know that we only have a finite number of time to be able to prepare that storage opportunity. But however, I think it's very clear, at least to me today, that we have to continue to rely on water from the Delta. And I think the opportunity to weigh in on that conversation, whether it's the fall or 2015, will be before us at some point. But we have, from my perspective, a real obligation to comment in this process now so that Los Angeles, and the largest city in the state, is not left out of the conversation. So with that, based on some conversations here, I'd like to amend the report in the following ways. On page 3, Mr. Koretz, I'd like to amend the second paragraph. It'll be the second sentence there, to strike out the sentence that begins with "nor do the," but replace that with, "While the draft BDCP documents do include a 36% construction contingency, Los Angeles ratepayers and other beneficiaries will be at risk from cost overruns and issues with project delivery that exceed that contingency." and hopefully that will memorialize at a minimum sort of the number that we currently have pegged to the cost should those conversations change and we sort of have to deal with that. On page 4, the third paragraph, third sentence, would like to amend the sentence that begins with "there is an opportunity," which is about halfway through the paragraph.
You got that?
To "there is an opportunity now to implement a long-term solution in the Delta through implementation of the BDCP. However, the state must remember that support for local water resource projects is a necessary and complementary component of the broader statewide water solution, and that proper cost control and allocation of a Delta solution will be necessary to ensure these local resource projects can be constructed." Mr. Koretz?
Yeah, my additional change would be that on page 3, where it says proposals identified in the draft BDCP, EIR, EIS meet the principles for a Delta solution, I would add the word could, so it would read proposals identified in the draft BDCP, EIR, EIS could meet the principles for a Delta solution.
Very good. I think we can live with that. Very good, colleagues. I'd like to thank the Department of Water and Power, the Bureau of Sanitation, the Ratepayer Advocate, and obviously, Director, for your attendance here today, and MWD. Always do it in my close, Mr. Koretz. Go ahead, sir.
Sorry. We never acknowledged my suggestion, my request on my motion that we ask that it return to staff to actually have an objective, independent, peer-reviewed analysis come back to this committee.
We'll get to that as soon as I finish. Anything else, sir?
Nothing else.
Very good. So thank you all for your attendance and your participation today. So the motion will be that we adopt the resolution granting DWP the authority to submit the city's comments as amended to the appropriate state agency concerning BDCP's draft plan, draft EIR, EIS, and draft implementing agreement. Without objection?
Order.
That will be the order. Very good. And as for your item, it will remain on the desk. Very good. Item number 3.
Item number 3 relates to Board of Public Works report relative to proposed revisions to the fees for the Japanese garden located at Donald C. Tillman Water Reclamation Plant. We have staff from the Bureau of Sanitation.
Very good, colleagues. This item is before us. We have seen it before. I'd like to make the recommendation that we approve this item in the Public Works report to adopt an updated schedule of fees for the Japanese garden at the Tillman Water Reclamation. In your reports there, you'll see what those proposed fees would be.
Second.
Very good. It's been seconded. Any questions, colleagues? Hearing and seeing none, that'll be the order. Very good. That wraps up our items. Items 4, 5, and 6 were dispensed with on consent. We do have one speaker card, Dr. Tom Williams. Very good. Very good. This meeting is adjourned.